Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 19 of Logicast, the AWS News Podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined today, as always, by my colleague, John Goodall. How are you doing today, John?
It's early and I'm stiff and sore and, costing you, I think, I don't know, money by using health insurance paid physiotherapists and that kind of thing. So,
Well, it
I
doesn't
don't know
cost
if that
any
costs
more
you any
money.
money.
No, well,
Yeah.
obviously, health insurance does cost the company money, but it doesn't cost any more money when you use it. That then costs the insurance company, I guess.
I shall use all the paid for appointments then, regardless of if I need them.
Absolutely, yes. Maximize the value that we're getting from that program. Your intro is very short today, though, John. I didn't include your job title. I haven't forgotten it. Of course, it is lead cloud engineer. Is that right? Yeah, got it right.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I don't know. Chief potwash, lead dog's body. I'll do what you tell me.
We haven't added anything yet about a global conference speaker. I guess because you're not global, you've only actually done it in the UK. But we can still go on about that for another year, I guess, until the conference happens again. Anyway, we're not here to just big you up, John. We are here to talk about AWS news, and I think you do enough of that yourself. But anyway, we are joined today by guest Rob Pankow. How are you doing today, Rob?
I'm great. Thanks, Carl. Thanks, John, for having me. Pleasure to be here.
You're very welcome. Tell us a bit about what you do for a living, Rob.
I'm a co-founder of SimplyBlock. So I'm a co-founder and CEO of SimplyBlock. It's a cloud-native storage platform. So in AWS world, it's essentially something like EBS, but it's your private EBS. It's cheaper, faster, more configurable with broader feature set. And that's what we're building at SimplyBlock for over 3 years now.
So you're building that on bare metal, or is it actually built in a hyperscaler cloud? How does it work?
So actually, it's cloud and hardware agnostic technology. It can run on bare metal. It can also run on virtualization like EC2. So it's really Linux native solution. It's actually even a user space solution. So it really detaches the NVMe disk from the kernel and reattaches it after the IO operation. And essentially, we can run anywhere, any kind of cloud, any kind of hardware, as long as we have NVMEs available. So we really like the NVMe optimized technology. So in some other words, could be EBS optimized for NVMEs.
Cool. What led you to found this business?
I actually met Michael, who's my co-founder, some time back, and he was actually already working on it. So I'm not coming from storage or even cloud native space personally. So my background is more in e-commerce companies and variety of startups worldwide. And I met Michael. He kind of fascinated me with the problem, the idea, and he's been already working on the technology itself and had some very early prototype. And generally the problem statement, the opportunity excited me, so I just jumped on the ship and we co-founded SimplyBlock.
Sounds good. How long have you been doing this for?
So it's been almost 3 years now. So we're after summer, it's going to be 3 years.
Well, I won't ask you about the challenges of starting a small business because maybe we can do that off air. But we're
happy to share. I think if that's relevant for your audience, always happy to talk about it. Maybe some things will come out. But starting a company it's a journey on itself.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And I think that would be a completely separate podcast episode if we were to dive into those issues. As regular listeners to the podcast, we're not here to talk about starting businesses, even though we are all very familiar with the challenges of doing so. We are here to
I just work for you.
Yeah, but you've done that for nearly 3 years in a 5.5-year-old business. So I think you're very familiar with some of the challenges of
working with you
and growing a business. Yeah, that is a challenge in itself. So, but also an opportunity, John, an opportunity. So.
Right.
Anyway, as I say, we're not here to talk about the challenges of growing startups. We are here to talk about AWS news. And as regular listeners to the podcast will know, once a week I curate a list of AWS news, which I share via my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John picks a selection of the articles that we'd like to talk about with our guests. So we do, of course, have such a selection this week. And the first one is actually squarely in Rob's sphere of interest. It's an article from the AWS News blog about how you can accelerate the transfer of data from an Amazon EBS snapshot to a new EBS volume. So this is the announcement into general availability of Amazon Elastic Block Store provisioned rate for volume initialization. I don't know if that has an acronym. Is it the PRVI? I don't know. Everything has an acronym. We can have entire conversations in acronyms. But yeah, Rob, I'll come to you first on this one because I know that obviously storage is your area of interest. So what are your thoughts on this new EBS snapshot acceleration feature?
Well, I think that's obviously generally a good thing for the users of AWS and EBS, right? So I think it tells a couple of things though. So first of all, I mean, EBS has been slow on restoring snapshots from backups, and that's why they're accelerating it. So obviously, this change comes as a result of probably users not being happy with the service to some extent. But at the same time, it's obviously good news. I think there are some things to note though, because always the fine line is to be read, right, and to be discovered. So I think when you just read the news, it sounds all great. So you're gonna be able to restore it with a fixed chosen speed. So you have two tiers to choose from. I think it's from 100 to 200 megabit per second, and then 200 to 300. So there are two options. But obviously, if there are options, it means they cost differently. So, so the first option, costs I think around 50% less than the other. So the faster you kind of want to restore it, the more it costs. So that's I think one thing to note. And the second thing to note is that actually EBS snapshots are already they kind of are stored in a back probably in something like S3 or in S3 itself. But it costs much more than S3. So actually storing EBS snapshots costs double of just storing things in S3. And on top of that, now you're going to pay extra for that guaranteed retrieval speed. So it's a great service, but it's going to be expensive. And I think this is normal in the cloud. You get things very convenient. But if you really want the top-notch speed and service, it's going to cost you a little bit. But I think the good thing is that that this option comes, and for people who really need that, they can use that. They can retrieve backups, do disaster recovery faster, which is obviously very, very business critical often wise. Yeah, I think it's overall obviously a good improvement of EBS. It's surprising that it comes only now, because I think that's been generally a hot topic. But this is storage. This is complex stuff to build, and I think especially for Amazon that builds a storage operation for such a broad audience and for so many different use cases, and it's essentially a public storage service that needs to cater for everyone. It's there's a lot of complexities to do any kind of changes in that system, right? So that's why it takes time, and that's why it also costs them extra money to kind of provide that service. But at the same time, for users, it's obviously the good thing to have that option, because by default they can still, I think, use the standard retrieval, and if they want kind of accelerate it, they can pay extra. Although that's actually something I'm not sure of. If now that you have to choose that guaranteed speed, or you can just go with the default. So that's actually something I'm not sure of.
Yeah, so
because,
it is optional. It is
right,
optional.
if it's
If you do
okay,
go for
great,
it,
great.
it
So
has
if
to
it's
be
optional,
minimum
I think
100 meg.
it's a good thing overall. Yeah.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. This is an interesting one because I obviously don't have any competing interest in this, and for my sins, whilst I'm a serverless community builder, and I say that at any opportunity, I spend entirely too much time working with servers for our customers because 60-something% of Amazon of AWS's revenue is still in EC2, right? And that covers things like EBS. So I spend an inordinate amount of time dealing with this kind of thing. It's not strictly speaking restoring snapshots faster. What it's doing is initializing the drive faster, because that's two different things. As you say, the snapshots are backed into S3, and it's an S3 bucket or set of buckets or what have you that's owned by the service team. That's quite normal for AWS services to use other services that they own, owned by said service team. If you start getting under the covers of services in the more kind of esoteric bits, you start seeing these rough edges. I mean, I've seen them a few places, things like CloudFormation and what have you, where you register custom types. And that's running a Lambda in an account I don't own, so I can't go and see what's going on there. So yeah, that's quite normal, because if they have this, 11 nines of durability and reasonably performant blob storage, why wouldn't you use that to back your backups into? Makes sense to me. Cool. This is sort of complementary to fast snapshot restore, which is a different thing. Okay, so fast snapshot restore gives you it allows you to promptly fully restore provisioned EBS volumes from snapshots regardless of the size or volume of the snapshot. Cool. That means the drive is there and it's available, but it's not necessarily fully initialized. And that's kind of a key bit there, right? Because when you connect a really big drive, as people can do, to EC2s, it's not necessarily fully initialized, so you're not going to get the full read and write speeds, or not everything is going to be quite available and what have you. And things like the exams talk about this as well, because they do talk about, if you want to initialize a drive, make sure you read and write from every single block on the drive. Okay. And what this is doing is basically saying, well, you don't need to do that yourself anymore. You can just pay us and we'll do that for you, which... Okay, cool. That's capitalism. I'm fully on board with that. I can live with that. That's fine by me. In terms of the pricing, it's reasonably okay. It's interesting because, as you say, it's tiered. So if you have an initialization rate of between 100 and 200 megabits a second, you pay, what's that, 25% of a cent per gigabyte, and if you do it a bit quicker, it goes up to about a third of a cent per gigabyte. So it's not expensive particularly. It will be for people that actually need this, though, because when you start talking about, I need to make sure I know how long this is initializing for and how long it's going to take before it's fully available, because I have high performance workloads and all the rest of it. So I'm going to run it at 300 megasecond, and that's going to cost me, a third of a cent per gigabyte, and I'm doing it over terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data. It is going to start to add up. So it doesn't hurt at the small scale, but for the people that actually really need this, because like your 100, 200 meg gig drives, they initialize pretty quick anyway, so it sort of doesn't matter. This is much more for people that have got these whacking great terabyte sized drives or petabyte sized drives, and it's going to hurt. But then equally, if you're storing petabytes of storage in EBS, that's going to hurt too. So, none of this is cheap.
It's all relative, I guess, isn't it? But who are the people who really need this? I know Rob mentioned disaster recovery as a potential use case. Are there other use cases?
That's kind of the only one that makes sense to me, right? Because this talks directly back to your RTO, which is your recovery time objective, because that way you can be at full capacity within a known period of time. That's what it talks back to. It's also high performance compute, I guess, for people like NASA and what have you. I can see them doing this sort of thing. That would make sense as well, I think.
Cool.
Right. Could be also for some sort of testing use cases or maybe analytics, but I think disaster recovery indeed is the main thing. And as John said, I mean I think it's generally the thing about the cloud. I mean, things are available to you like at kind of pay as you go, and if you're a small user, it's fine. You just pay a little bit here, a little bit there. It's fair, right? Because running your own service would be very costly. But if you have scale, I think those things that seem cheap at the minimum scale, at massive scale, they become expensive, right? And I think that's also where solutions like SimplyBlock potentially come, where we have the third-party marketplace offerings that kind of let you run your own private operation within AWS, where you kind of don't have to pay for every single thing that can be offered, because you kind of own the technology, right? So same can happen obviously with databases. Same can happen with all kinds of different platform layers, where instead of just getting something as a service, you can just deploy it in your own VPC and run it. But it's a trade-off that I think rather larger users face rather than small AWS users, right?
Yeah, exactly. And once you do get to that kind of large enterprise scale, then there are other ways to reduce costs with AWS, like private pricing agreements, that kind of thing. So it's making sure that all of those programs are being leveraged to optimize the cost in the best way possible. But at the end of the day, it's often going to cost more to have someone else doing something for you than it is to do yourself. And cloud repatriation is a thing, although not as much of a thing that as the press may like to make out. But I did see an article yesterday about 37 Signals again, who've been very vocal about migrating out of AWS and saving millions of dollars per year. I think they finally completed their exit from AWS. There's news article about
correct.
that. But I guess for every organization that's talking about moving out of the cloud because it's cheaper, there's several more stories of organizations who are still going all in. So it's
the repatriation thing is just baffling to me. It's baffling because it's the cloud is dying, people are leaving. No, the people that are leaving the cloud should never have gone there in the first place, and they didn't do their research properly.
It wasn't the right thing for them.
Moving on.
Exactly. Yeah. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. I think we've covered the first of our articles for this week. So let's move on to our second article for this week, and it is, of course, about the hot topic of AI. So we've only got into our second article before we've mentioned AI this week. But this is an article on dev.to, I think, by an AWS hero, all about how AI agents work and how to build them, with some JavaScript in this case, but lots of talk about AI agents. And so I think it'd be interesting for us just to have a chat about what they are and maybe a little bit on how to build them, as that's what the article is about. But John, I'll come to you first on this one. So thoughts on AI agents and building them in JavaScript? I know you're a big JavaScript fan, aren't you?
Kill me. Oh dear. Yeah, it's okay. So if you look back a couple of years ago, everything had to be ML, and then it was LLMs, and now everything has to be agentic. And it's like, well, okay, what does that even mean? Well, it means that the AI has been empowered, I guess, for lack of a better term, to do a bit more than the foundation model can cope with, right? Because foundation models have cutoff points in their terms of reference. They're trained up to a certain point on the reference data, and then they have nothing kind of new beyond that. And if you talk to something like ChatGPT or Perplexity or any of these other kind of chat interfaces, they're somewhat agentic, because you can say, go and look at this thing on the internet, and it will go and do that. It's not in its training data, but it will go and do that. And that's kind of where I think the layperson, for lack of a better term, sort of struggles to understand the difference between what's the large language model, what's the foundation model, well, kind of the same thing, and then what's this agent, what's that doing. And it's kind of, if you look at these consumer level services, they're all kind of a bit of a fuzzy mess, because if you want to talk directly to a foundation model, you can, but it's not massively useful. And then you go on to ChatGPT, for just the example I'm going to use, and you hit search and reasoning, and then all of a sudden you've got a much more advanced model, and it has some sort of agentic capacity because it can go off and actually do some research and look at the internet, where if you turn those things off, it can't do that. And that's kind of what this is talking about. And this is an enormous, great article with some frankly amazing illustrations. Go and look at it, because they're great. And it just sort of it talks about what they are, and it talks about how to build them. It's a very, very long article, but the key points at the top here is someone on Twitter, okay, so that's obviously a gold standard for information, said most jobs will be obsolete in less than 10 years. Okay, but then McKinsey, who's reasonably well respected, say that AI agents will replace about 70% of office work, and I can believe that. I don't know what the timescale for that is, but I can believe that. And it's the same thing with the loom and the printing press and the internet and the cloud and so on and so on and so on. Is they'll replace 70% of this semi-skilled, for lack of a better term, job. And you just have to understand these things, and you have to be able to work with them and know how to use them. Because if you are sitting there going, "Oh, I can't possibly do this. Oh, it's my job," then you're just going to get replaced. So it's worth knowing this, is worth reading this, is worth just looking at the images, because they're brilliant and they make me laugh.
Do you think they're AI generated images, perhaps?
I really hope that the author drew them. I really hope that he did, but I don't think. I think they're generated, but they're great. And it kind of talks about how, like I did at the start of this point, it talks about how LLMs have cutoffs, and it uses Claude as an example. And then it sort of goes into, effectively, an agent is like a while loop. And we sort of had a guest on before that walked us through this. And my immediate thought was, well, it looks like a step function. And that's kind of the same thing. It's here's my input. Do I know how to answer it? No. Can I go off and search for it? Yes. What's my result from the search? And kind of loop round and loop round and loop round. And that's worth understanding. And like I say, it's worth a read. It's very long. It does talk you through kind of building one, and it's how do I request PTO? Can I have an agent for that, please? And maybe I should go off and follow this guide and build it, because our PTO process could do with some work. But maybe we need an agent for that. But it's interesting. It's very good. But yeah, I will admit I sort of zoned out about halfway through. So,
Rob, what are your thoughts on this? Anything to add?
Yeah, actually, I second the last point of John. I think it started very interesting, but obviously then it became like very technical, kind of like how to do stuff. I think that the topic of agentic AI is very, very interesting, and it's obviously very, very hot. I think, we still don't know how the future is going to look like, but obviously these days everyone thinks that there's going to be an agent for everything, and then those agents will eventually start maybe communicating to each other, transferring knowledge between agents, and then this will really lead to the concept of AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. So one might visualize it like that, but how it's going to turn in reality, it's hard to say. I think one challenge I see is that, or two challenges I see is that, firstly, there's going to be a lot of agents for everything at the moment, how it's being built, and there's like it sounds nice, but then how all those agents going to be managed, and how it's really going to work in practice, I think that's a big question. The second question is, there's a lot of things agents can do already, but it's most of the time not like production ready, if you know what I mean. In other words, it's the output is not reliable enough for someone to fully rely on an agent. I think this is.
you're not vibe coding your whole business,
right? So actually, I've done some vibe coding in the last weeks, and it was great. But you only get to a certain stage, right? Like then you still need to turn to a human, right? And it's the same with the agents. I mean, they can book hotels, and like, would you go on a trip to Asia, fully booked by an agent, AI agent? I mean, I think today few people would, right? Maybe if people have like spare resources and just want to, say, hey, I went on a trip fully booked by an agent, they would do it. But like most of the people won't, right? So when would be the time when really you would just tell an agent, hey, I want to just, go there to this, and I trust you fully that, you're going to get me the best deals, the best itinerary, right? Like the cancellation policies, insurance. I mean, I think it's possible, and we'll get there, but it might take a little bit of time, right, to really get there reliably.
Yeah, I guess somebody's got to take the plunge, and then it becomes word of mouth, doesn't it? When people start trusting these things.
The holiday itinerary is an interesting parallel, because I've heard it before. It's the AI agent versus travel agent, but you trust the travel agent because there's a human sat in front of you. You know where they work, and you can go and shout at them if it's awful.
Right.
The AI is not. You don't have that, and it's the same sort of thing. But even with a travel agent, I mean, I'm too young to really use a travel agent because they died in the 2000s. Let's be honest here.
Not for everyone.
Yeah, right. But I'd been in travel agent offices with parents and what have you, and I got a magazine and all this. Even if the travel agent had booked something, you would go and validate it yourself to the extent that you could, because it was the 90s and the internet wasn't such the thing that it is now. But you would go and validate it to the extent that you could, that you were happy with the money and you knew where you were going, and it all kind of made sense, and you weren't, you weren't going to Hong Kong via Beirut or something weird like that. Like the routes and things made sense. So I think you have to be exceptionally brave to not do that, even with a human on the other end of things. And more so with an AI. But yeah, just an interesting parallel, I thought.
Absolutely. Well, there we go. The agents are coming, but they're not taking over the world just yet. Maybe we've got a decade, maybe less time. We'll have to see how things pan out over the next coming years. On that note, let's move along to our third article for this week, which we had to dig around for this morning because it's another one of those disappearing news articles. This was an article which was published last week on the AWS Security blog, and I shared it via my newsletter on Friday, and we shared it with Rob to discuss. And when we clicked on the link this morning, it disappeared. So by the powers of internet archiving and the Wayback Machine, we have found a copy of the article from Friday. So it's an article that was on the AWS Security blog, for some reason is no more. But the title is Introducing the AWS User Guide to Governance, Risk and Compliance for Responsible AI Adoption within Financial Services Industries. So obviously, we've just spoken about AI agents, how they are coming, but there's still a lot of paranoia around AI, and rightly so. We don't want anybody's personal data appearing in other people's results coming out of large language models, etc. So you need to make sure that if you are going to start adopting these AI technologies, you do them in a responsible way. But that's not to say that the risks are so great that businesses are not already doing this. At the AWS Summit London, NatWest took the stage to talk about how they were leveraging AI to personalized conversations with their 20 million banking customers. So when it comes to personal identifiable information, I guess banking customer data is right up there in terms of what is the most sensitive. So if businesses like NatWest can adopt this technology, then your business can too. So AWS has produced this guide on governance, risk and compliance for responsible AI adoption. John, what are your thoughts on this?
The NatWest thing is an interesting one. I'll touch on the article in a minute. The NatWest thing is an interesting one because it's 20 million customers, and it was talking about across their business bank and their wealth management brand, which is Coutts, which got a load of flack for rescinding, I think it was Nigel Farage's account, because it was viewed as this whole politically motivated thing. And it turns out, no, mate, you just don't have enough money, which was just amazing because it's a wealth management firm, so you have to have X amount of money in your bank account. So they just kicked you back down to a normal NatWest account. I think that was just fantastic. But it was across, a number of their different areas, right? It wasn't just the retail bank. And I used to work in banking, and I work for an investment bank, and there's loads of different facets to that kind of industry. But it's very interesting, and chat is absolutely the right kind of forum to be using this sort of thing. In terms of the article, I've no idea why it was taken off of the internet. Nothing is ever off of the internet, because all it's actually talking about, it's 4 paragraphs saying that here's a guide and you can get it from AWS Artifact within your own account. Okay. I haven't gone and read the guide because I didn't want to have to log into AWS Artifact to go and read it. Maybe they're taking the guide away from Artifact again, and they kind of need to stop talking about the fact that it exists. Maybe that's the thing. Maybe it wasn't actually quite ready to go, and that's why they sort of pulled this. In terms of what it's talking about, though, it's responsible AI adoption within financial services. And financial services, it's not just banking. So banking is a reasonably big sector. As I've said, there's retail, there's commercial, there's business, which is different to commercial, actually. There's wealth management, there's investments, and so on and so on. So that's a reasonably big market anyway, and they're all going to have their own kind of specific requirements and things that they need to take account of, because an investment bank is not necessarily going to have the same level of personal data as a retail bank or a wealth management firm or what have you. But it's not just that, because financial services is also people like some fintechs will cover as financial services, things like stock exchanges, reference agencies, ratings agencies, they all kind of come under financial services as well. So it's an interesting one because, as we say, AI is coming. The agents are coming, which is just the best phrase ever, and I'm going to use that now. The agents are coming. They're wearing red. They might be. And specific guidance for people like FSIs is incredibly useful because they have these fairly onerous compliance restrictions. So if you are, one of our 6 listeners that happens to work in finance, go and find it and tell me if you can find the guide through AWS Artifact, and tell me if it disappeared again, because I'd love to know. It sits alongside other resources as well, because there's a whole bunch of other bits about responsible use of AI, and there's a generative AI lens for the well-architected framework, and so on and so on. So it's an interesting, but I still can't peg why they took this article away.
Well, I can tell you that by the power of the internet, I have just downloaded the article from AWS Artifact, so it is still there. So that's not why the article has disappeared. I don't know why the article is referencing this article has disappeared from the security blog, because it's still available in AWS Artifact. Anyway, Rob, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think John covered it quite in depth. I think maybe the only takeaway is really that financial services, I think it's a really tricky industry, and as John said, there's no one single profile of a financial institution. Like even in banking, you have really breadth of banks, because how you have banks serving mostly businesses, individuals, right? Wealth management, investment banks, et cetera, et cetera. You have all kinds of different banking institutions, and obviously the regulations across countries differ. So I am not sure how useful those things are, that AWS produces, because they're always going to be very specific to the country, to the profile of the institution. But I think, on the other hand, there's surely a demand from customers to have some sort of guidelines. So if someone's working in a bank doing something with the cloud, they at least cannot say, "Hey, I just went wild," but like, "Hey, I followed this guide that AWS built," right? So you don't blame me, right? It's not on me if something goes wrong, right? But I think it's still just very early days of regulation, and in terms of the AI usage within financial services sector, and those things will be coming. But I think it's not going to be those kind of guides that eventually will regulate the AI in the financial services industry.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of risks to adopting AI that we don't yet know. So those will become more apparent, and that obviously will change any of this kind of guidance as to what is appropriate and what is not. So yeah. Okay, on that note, let's move along to our fourth article for this week. Sticking with AI, this is an article on the AWS machine learning blog about how you can get faster and actionable AWS Trusted Advisor insights to make data-driven decisions using Amazon Q Business. So Q Business, of course, is Amazon's I guess he's an agent, is he? Q?
If kind of, yeah.
It's Amazon's business application that allows users to query various data sources using natural language to return insights. So you don't need any kind of coding or data science knowledge to get data insights back. And Trusted Advisor, of course, is a tool in the AWS console that advises you about various best practice elements to your AWS infrastructure. So, John, how's Q Business going to help us get those insights?
Well, it's sure as hell not going to make Trusted Advisor any better. Useless thing. No, Trusted Advisor is fine. I just have real ideologic problems with it as a service, because it's one of the only services that's tied up with your support tier.
So
yes,
you don't get before, yeah.
And every time Trusted Advisor comes up, I just rage against this because it infuriates me. It's a reasonably good tool, and the people that really need Trusted Advisor are the people that can't necessarily afford to pay for the business level support. That make it make sense. Someone at an AWS product team, like, I've signed NDAs and stuff, tell me why this is a thing, because make it make sense, please. This doesn't make sense to me, right? You can't have the full set of things that would tell you how you should build stuff unless you're paying for a support package that you probably can't afford. Make it make sense. Like I say, if there's someone in a product team that listens to this, I've signed an NDA. Like, please come and talk to me about this, because every time this comes up, I'm going to get angry about it, and that's not a good look for anybody. Right, moving on. Yes, I always pick these things just so I can shout about it.
I thought you were going to start turning green then, and your T-shirt was going to start tearing or something.
I know, I can't tear this. It's a relic from a company that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, you must have got to the bottom of the pile, because you had that one on last week as well.
It's quite thin and it's quite warm today, so that's
fair enough.
Yeah. I've got to be careful of the relics. This is an interesting article, right? Trusted Advisor aside, right? So it's talking about using IMIDC for logins, fine. Q Business so you can chat to stuff, so you don't necessarily have to kind of know where you're going with it. Trusted Advisor to get the report out, and then Jira, everyone's least favorite project management tool, to create tasks to go and create these remediations. Cool. I like all of those things. I don't like Jira, but I use Jira, under protest. And it's an interesting setup. There's quite a lot you have to do to get this to work. You have to make the business application yourself. It doesn't just already exist. You have to go and get it to get the CSV data out of an S3 bucket, having told Trusted Advisor to go and put that data in an S3 bucket. You have to index the data, and so on and so on and so on. And then you have to make a plugin for Jira. You have to configure the plugin for Jira so it can talk to Jira as well. And it's a reasonably interesting article, and it's a really interesting thing that you can do, right? Because if you are, it's not particularly relevant for us because we're a consultancy, but if you're a product business and you're using Trusted Advisor and you want findings to just be spammed into Jira so that your platform team or whoever can go and make fixes for you appropriately, and they're going, oh, you need a ticket for that, as developers and platform teams are want to do, because you've got to track your work somewhere, then you can build this and you can do it, and it's reasonably clever, and you can sort of talk to it and say, well, explain these things to me and make that into a ticket and what have you. So it's worth looking at, it's worth going and reading this. But this is another one, I don't like Trusted Advisor, and two, this is a lot of work for something that should just exist. I'd think there should be at this point, and maybe it's coming, I don't know, and maybe it isn't, and they're going to get this idea because product teams are listening to me on this podcast, obviously. Maybe there's going to be a marketplace for Q for business or Q developer plugins or what have you, that then go and do these sorts of things. Because if this existed as a, you can just install this and we'll do it for you, I'd be all over this. But it's a lot of work is my issue with this.
As these things often are. Rob, any thoughts to add on this one?
Well, I think John really covered it well. I think it sounds like it's not, AI native experience here. You'd want to just have it done, right? Like just put a prompt and just the ticket is created. And it sounds like there's a lot of setup, a lot of manual intervention. Also, it's a question, obviously, on what's going to be the output. Because if it's now going to start creating, tons of tickets that are sort of not really relevant, right? And then it's going to come down to the product platform developer teams, and they'll be like, why, would we do that? Like, why we're now spammed with all those tickets that are, AI generated, right? And like, who's in charge of that and so on. I think that could lead to some friction, but I think, again, the idea is good. Maybe it's still just really like an MVP of a solution rather than, a full usable product. That's how I'd see it.
I guess it depends how much you trust Trusted Advisor.
Well, Trusted Advisor is not often wrong, but in a lot of cases where it's saying, this is a yellow or this is a red, at least when I build things, and I'm by no means an expert, but AWS seems to think I know what I'm doing, keep passing exams. It's intentional, right? So it's one of those, well, that's intentional, go and mute that finding, please. I like the idea generally because it's a queue application, it's a chat bot, and you can say, give me, and the examples are, Lambda functions that are over provisioned. It'll go off and give them, okay, create a ticket to handle that, please. And it'll go off and create a ticket. I can see, as Rob says, I can see a number of platform teams going, and just closing things with won't do. Right. So I can see that happening. But it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting concept. The blog was written by a technical account manager. So it was written by Tam, who are generally really clever people. They really know what they're talking about. So this is a really good idea, but it's a lot of work.
Right. I think, I generally think what John said earlier, I mean, it should be just, or like I think one of you said earlier, like it should be just there. I think it's generally with all kinds of cost optimization tools or like waste reduction tools within AWS. It's like you can kind of do it with third-party solution or with some Amazon tool, but it's always kind of bulky. It's not really out there. But I think when we connect it back with the agentic AI topic, you ideally would really just have an agent that just optimizes the hell out of your infrastructure on the cloud, right? It just like does everything: compute, storage, network optimization. Just really gives you the best for what you need. So sort of to say, eventually it should be like that. You should say, hey, I'm running an e-commerce shop, right, for X number of users. I have those much demands in traffic. Just do it for me. I just need an infrastructure that perfectly fits what I want, right? And then it picks whether you should run Lambda or whether you should run, serverless databases or not, or RDS or whatever, right? And I think this eventually should and maybe would be a cloud experience, while now it's like you have this suite of tools of 355 different tools and solutions, and you can like pick the best out of it and just do it yourself, right? Which is still, I think it's like we're in a kind of like a bridge era between the original cloud and the AI native world, right? And obviously AWS is just too much of a business, too big of a business to kind of change itself overnight. And I think this is what we're going to talk about in the next article, and that's why it's not happening overnight. But I think it eventually needs to happen, right? That this experience needs to be just smoother.
Well, let's hope it's a very long bridge, because when people can do what you described, Rob, we need to find something else to do.
Right, right. I
Yeah,
mean,
as a business.
that's also a
So
little bit of a challenge, but I think it doesn't only come down to the cloud services, right? It's people fear about their
exactly.
jobs in all kinds of industries, right?
Yeah. And the only way to alleviate that fear is to move on and find other ways to add value.
Right,
We all, whatever business you're in. So
right.
anyway, on that note, let's move along to our final article for this week. This is an article on CRN, all about the recent cloud hyperscaler earnings announcements. So Q1 2025 has just ended. Cloud providers have reported their numbers, and this one is digging into primarily, I think, market share of the three largest hyperscalers: AWS, Microsoft, and Google, in that order. And Rob, I know this is an area that you were particularly interested in as well. So what are your thoughts on the recent earnings announcements from the hyperscalers?
Thanks, Carl. Yeah, I think it's amazing what the results are producing. So I'm really in awe of all of them and how big of the businesses those are and how fast they're growing. I think John said at the beginning that the cloud repatriation is not really a thing and the cloud is growing, and I think generally it's true. I think you will have to really break down the results because all of them, they grow very fast, between 17 and 35% year on year. So AWS is growing the slowest at 17% last quarter, but it's by far the biggest. So that's why it's growing the slowest. So it's, in absolute terms, it's still kind of growing billions of dollars in revenue per quarter. So it's still very impressive growth. Although Azure is really standing out this last quarter with 35% year-over-year growth. I think they had a lot of good momentum with GitHub Copilot, with a lot of side things like their Foundry as well, and they really grew very, very fast. But I think the point is that at this scale, to grow that fast, you really need to kind of do something exceptional, and there needs to be exceptional demand for your services. And this is really what we see in the cloud. So AI is really driving the growth of the cloud again. That's very clear. And even if some people are dropping the cloud, I think the users that are within the cloud, they just keep spending more. Partially because there's opportunities to spend more always, like the services we just covered. Is like, yes, there's a bunch of new add-ons to the cloud and services, but it's going to cost you a little bit more, right? So that's obviously one way all the hyperscalers are growing, but the other way is there's always someone migrating into the cloud. Even if some people are leaving the cloud, there's always someone migrating into the cloud. I think one point I want to take and let that sink in. AWS is a business now with ARR, so that the revenue run rate, yearly revenue run rate of around $120 billion. So that's more than Tesla. That's more revenue than Tesla. So that's equivalent to delivering more than 2 million cars per year. So if AWS would be a car manufacturer, premium car manufacturer, they would have to be building 2 million cars per year to kind of make up that revenue, right? And what's even more fascinating is that they're operated 40% gross margin. So in other words, every dollar of revenue they're getting, their kind of operating costs are only 60% of that, right? So 40% gross margin. It's a very, very good business. So that's like Apple-like and kind of level of margins, right? So I think really this is probably one of the best businesses of the last decade. AWS and all the actually clouds, but AWS is by far the biggest and probably the purest, because Google is mixing up some other non-pure cloud services into their revenue. And same with Azure, obviously with Microsoft 365 and so on. But AWS is really just a cloud business, and the numbers they're showing and the growth they keep generating, it's just astounding. So I think I'm really impressed, and I'm always following those results, because that's really some of the best businesses of our era. And people will be looking back to those businesses like we're now looking back to Apple, how great it was to invest in Apple and how great of a business Apple is. I think right now it's really all about those cloud providers, and they have tremendous opportunity ahead of them as well. So whatever happens with cloud migration or not, I think they have tremendous opportunities. As of what we said, right? Eventually you might have really infrastructure as a prompt, right? So there was a thing, infrastructure as a code. They might just really develop the infrastructure as a prompt, and they might really make it usable for all kinds of little vibe coders and so on, just so you can spin up infrastructure you need with with a prompt, not having an idea what Kubernetes is, not having an idea what storage is, what EC2 is. I think when they reach that level, they can really unlock another another huge potential for growth eventually, and this might become even much larger or much more significant of a business than it is today. So I think generally impressive results, lots of opportunities ahead still, but obviously fierce competition because there's a lot of upcoming players in that segment.
Yeah, I think they've tried to do the whole, auto creation of infrastructure in various different ways, Beanstalk, App Runner, Amplify, etc., but still nowhere near as simple as what you're describing, Rob. And it'd be interesting to see, if that is coming, and when that sort of thing is coming along. John, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, nothing major on top of that. That was much more than I'm familiar with earnings because I'm an engineer. Let's be honest. The only kind of takes I have on this is, it's ridiculous numbers from everybody anyway, and it's only 19% or whatever it is. It's on billions and billions. So like, okay, whatever, who cares? As ever, we have the inconsistent reporting from the three major providers because GCP, as we've said, includes GCP, Google Workspace, and some platform services. Microsoft doesn't explicitly call out Azure or Azure. I don't know how you pronounce that. So it also includes.
So I think I've heard one story. It's from it's from Badger. So I think originally it's supposed to be called Badger. So it's like Azure. I think that's
I've never heard that one before.
I heard it from someone from Microsoft. So it was originally meant to be Badger, and that's the. Yeah,
I just thought it was a Seattle accent, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
Still, but yeah, that's not called out independently. It's also called out alongside things like 365 and actually sales of PCs as well, which is a bit of a weird one to include, but okay. And then to be fair, AWS is not entirely pure cloud on this because they do have a workspace product, but nobody uses it. So that revenue is kind of inconsequential in these numbers.
Yeah, but that's just VDI. So it's not like, that's different to, desktop operating systems and that kind of thing. And,
but the revenue sources is incredibly inconsistent from them, and that's immensely frustrating, particularly for someone outside of that sphere. I feel like I just want to see, who's doing better, and you can't do that. So that's immensely frustrating and always will be. The only other interesting thing is if you go through the article a little way, it does start calling out the revenue and operating income for parent companies. And I think that's really interesting because it's not strictly speaking about the cloud providers. It's about the companies that own the cloud providers. And that's interesting for two levels. The first is because Amazon's revenue is way ahead of both Google and Alphabet's. So that's Google and Microsoft and all the rest of it. It's way out there. So that's quite interesting. And for two, it also shows just how much money you need to get started building a hyperscaler, because you need to have a massively successful business to then have another one that costs you a load of money up front to then go and make a load more money later. I think that's quite interesting.
Right. I mean, that's obviously how all of them started, although these days you do see, hyperscalers popping up just from scratch, but still the point stays, it takes a lot of money. So companies like CoreWeave, or in Europe we have AWS in Sweden, right? That's trying to start up for the last 3 years already, and they already raised like 100 million just to launch the service. It takes massive amounts of money, and I think maybe one point on Amazon itself. Yes, Amazon's revenue is, Amazon.com revenue is obviously by far larger than any cloud service out there, but basically most of the profit of Amazon as a company comes from AWS. So if you look at the success of Amazon as a whole, it's really mostly AWS. So when you look from the bottom line
perspective, let's be honest.
Yeah. So when you look from the bottom line perspective, it's the e-commerce business. It's kind of like the adjacent side thing to AWS business. So that's really interesting, I think.
And yet the average layperson has never even heard of AWS. When people ask me what I
Right.
do, I usually start with, well, Amazon.com, where you buy your books, whatever. And most people are blissfully unaware that it even exists, which I think is why they're doing a lot of TV advertising now, and sponsoring things like F1, etc., just to get the name out there a little bit more, so that people.
Right.
It's
But
the
I guess
biggest
a
company you've
layperson,
never heard of.
exactly, yeah. But I guess a layperson doesn't need to know, right? What difference does it make if the layperson knows? But
That's always a fun conversation. It's what do you do for a living? So before I answer that, what do you do for a living?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. To temper the answer, or to tailor the answer to something that they might understand. Anyway, on that note, we have reached the end of our time for season 4, episode 19 of Logicast. So just remains for me to thank you, John, as always, for your insights, and to thank you, Rob Pankow, for joining us today and sharing your insights as well. It's been great to have you on board and hear your thoughts about what's going on in the world of AWS news. If you are still listening, thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed it, please do tell your friends. We are available from wherever you download your podcasts. And if you'd like to see the funny faces we're pulling when we're talking to one another, you can also watch us on our YouTube channel, where you can subscribe and receive notifications of new episodes, which, of course, are weekly. We will be back next week with another episode of Logicast for you. In the meantime, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.